5:30 p.m. I'm very pleased you have taken the time to join us this evening. In compliance with the State Government Code on Open Meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. These proceedings are being video and audio recorded and will become part of Judson's permanent legal record. In order that the tape adequately reflects these proceedings, please silence your mobile devices and refrain from talking while others are speaking. Once again, I extend to each of you a sincere welcome from the entire school board. Thank you for your interest in Judson ISD. We have established a quorum, and I will call roll. All right, you can mark your attendance. All right, and we have 5 members present, and I know Ms. Stanford texted me she's on her way in traffic. All right, and next thing on our agenda is citizens to be heard, and we don't have any of those. So now we will move on to the consent agenda. Did any board members want to pull any of those 3 things off of consent? You're good? Okay.
I think so.
All right, can I get a motion on the consent agenda then? It's been a long day for some of us. I move that we approve the consent agenda as published.
Second.
All right, motion by Ms. Ryan, second by Mrs. Poteet. All right, oops, let me record, sorry. All right, and go ahead and vote. All right, and motion passes 5-0. All right, now I will turn it over to the superintendent for budget information. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board, tonight we have our budget presentation, the first one for this year. We're very excited about bringing these numbers forward from our other financial solvency presentations. Dr. Gosh, Mr. Greg Gibson, Ms. Martinez, and myself will be part of the presentation, and so we will be sitting down there, and Dr. Gosh will
Good evening, Madam President, board members, trustees, Dr. Jackman. Want to start this evening by going over our preliminary draft of our budget as our first budget workshop. We have lots of information that we want to share tonight. This is kind of step 1 to kind of work everyone through the process that we're going through in terms of adopting the budget. Am I not on? Now I'm on. Okay. Now everybody can hear me. All right, so we will start with in talking about our proposed budget as we move into budget season. And I want to start by saying tonight the main focus of everything that we have been working on through this process, and I do want to say we have spent a lot of time. I know Ms. Amanda Martinez has spent an enormous amount of time working with Lori through Moat Casey and Dr. Gibson as well, and myself, but the real integral part of the work and the real number crunching and the things have really been done by Ms. Martinez. So I absolutely want to thank her for the hard work that's here. What we're going to do tonight is kind of look at a lot of the overarching pieces here, the big budgetary items, and look at it as a whole picture. And we'll talk about how our roles interact as we begin to build this. But the first and probably the biggest point that I want to make is that we are presenting to you tonight a balanced budget. We are looking at a balanced budget. We have worked through the numbers, and we know that with the adoption of this budget, as we move into this next school year, we will be able to regain. I know we've had some conversations before about how our fund balance has dropped over the course of the last several years, and with the adoption of this budget, we will begin to see the incremental increases in that fund balance to bring us back to the reserve of the 3 months that the state says that we should have. So everything that we've done within this budget is really based on the idea of a balanced budget. And so we wanted to start first, and let's talk briefly about our underlying budget assumptions. And in our previous presentations, as we talked about school consolidations, as we talked about working towards our right sizing of the district, we had what we called our guiding principles. And those were the parameters that were really looked at. Well, when we start to talk about the budget, there were certain things that we needed to assume and we needed to make sure that we addressed in terms of working towards a balanced budget. The first of those things that we really want to highlight here is student enrollment. So student enrollment is one of the things that really should drive any development of a budget. We are here to educate students, and that is exactly what we want to do. So our student enrollment is something we need to look at. And we know over the course of the last several years, we peaked in about 2022, and steadily we have seen a decline in our students. So as our student enrollment declines, our revenues begin to decline. And that is also equal to, as student enrollment declines, some of your expenditures decline as well. And so as you work through that budget, you really need to look at that. But when we talk about student enrollment, and we talk about the declining of student enrollment, there's a couple of things that go into that when we talk about the budget. It really goes into building those parameters so that as we begin to build the staffing models for our campuses, that we're addressing those student needs based on our current student numbers, not based on where we were last year, not based on we lost an employee came in, but we're really looking at how many students we have, what are the services that we need to offer, and really balancing those equations to have an effective staffing model where as we go through the year, we've built those parameters around those pieces so that we can make sure that the corrections that we're making now, we can continue going forward. So we're working with HR to build those parameters, and then on the other side of that, we are also working in the finance department to make sure that those hiring practices that we're putting into place also match with our financial practices on the other side. As you know, a majority of our funding comes from our average daily attendance and our projections based on that. Our enrollment is always higher than our average daily attendance because that has to do with the numbers of students that are here 90% of the time or more, and that's what our goal is. So we're looking at those students that come in for average daily attendance. And then, of course, based on the state calculations, the funding that we do receive in the revenue there comes from our weighted average daily attendance. And so those are just, general parameters that we always have to look at as we begin to build the budget. And those are some of the assumptions that have been used in order to project the revenues that we are expecting to see. And of course, our property values and our tax rate, that's an extremely important part. And through the presentation, there's several areas here where I'm going to dive a little bit deeper, so I'm not really going to spend time right now talking about our property values and our tax rate, but we are going to dive into the taxable value that we have in our district. We're also going to dive into the growth rates of what that looks like in terms of dollars that are available to the district. We'll talk about some of those golden pennies and copper pennies that are available to school districts as well. We also have to consider our debt service and our tax rate. So this is what we call our INS rate, and we'll talk briefly about that. That is strictly to pay down bond dollars and to pay our debt. So it is not usable when we talk about a locally funded budget. One of the biggest components here in our budget parameters, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about our budget amendments. So you can see our big point here is that we want to limit the number of budget amendments that we have for the 26-27 year. I've got some, I don't know what just went in my throat. To prevent withdrawals from our fund balance. Now, I know for those that look at the board book on a regular basis and you hear us talk about every single month we have an agenda item where we talk about budget amendments. So when we talk about limiting our budget amendments, we're not talking about those cross-function amendments where we might move funds from function 11 to function 53 or function 11 to function 12. So these are literally budget amendments for those items that would require us to dip into fund balance. So as we're building the budget, I know one of the things that Ms. Martinez has been working with Lori through Moat Casey to do is really to work on what does that look like in our budget? Where are our biggest expenditures coming from? We know that we are identifying our biggest hitters when it comes to our locally funded budgets. Obviously, our largest budget item is our staff, and so we've addressed that with the right sizing of the staff. But now we need to dig into our operations a little bit. We know that our maintenance department, our maintenance and facilities department, that is a huge area. I know the board has talked many times about making sure that we are budgeting appropriately in order to make sure that we can hit those targets for repairs and maintenance of our systems. Technology is another one, special education, all things that contribute to the district. So we want to look at those particular items and make sure we're funding those appropriately. So we're doing some movements, we're doing some looks at that, and Areas where we know we are overspending right now, we need to make sure we budget appropriately for that and identify where we can reduce costs, but also where we can put those funds to work best so that we're not in that situation. Ideally, we would like to say no budget amendments, but we also understand that sometimes there's things that happen, so that's why we say very strongly with limited budget amendments. And one thing we can think about, I know in the past, one of the things that we see happen in the district is something comes up and it's something that we really want to do. And we're like, hey, this would be a great thing for the district. We really want to do this. This would be something that would help us propel. And so we've kind of done that, and then we bring it to the board, and we look at it, and we go, okay, we're going to go ahead and fund that. When we talk about limiting budget amendments, we're also going to talk about limiting funding and funding those things that we're not currently budgeted for. So if we have those really great ideas, I know one of the things we want to start talking about when we start talking about budget going into next year, probably around the December timeframe, is what are those big ideas? And if it's something that, hey, this is a really great thing, we really want to bring this in the district, we need to prepare, because this first year it is extremely important that we stay within these boundaries of the budget that we have, and start developing those lists of things that we know we want to budget for next year as our fund balance gets more healthy. The next budget parameter is next level urgent care. Briefly want to talk about this because this is a program that has been an extreme benefit, not only to our employees, but it has also helped us tremendously in the healthcare area. I know in speaking with Blue Cross Blue Shield, they are looking at actually offering another level of a plan for our employees, which would be kind of a high deductible plan, simply because so many of our employees are going directly to the next level urgent care for all of their primary care and even some of the minor emergency care. And so all of those bills are being covered by the coverage that we are getting from next level urgent care. So we are budgeting for that. And as you know, this year, typically, we look at those claims. It's a total cost of $790,000, but Blue Cross Blue Shield reimburses us for part of that because it limits the number of claims that they have to do and lowers their cost. So by being able to work with this program and continue to fund this program, we're providing a benefit to our employees, but at the same time, now we're also able to offer some additional plans through Blue Cross Blue Shield that can help bring healthcare costs down for our employees overall. And that puts extra dollars back in their pockets in a time of high inflation and other things. So that is something that we want to budget for. And the last piece is the Vader analysis, and we are going to touch just vaguely on this tonight. We're going to talk about, as we talk about taxable value and we talk about our revenues, we're going to talk a little bit about golden pennies and copper pennies, but this is really a conversation that will happen later as we go into our next budget workshop. But it is one of the budget assumptions that we did use as we moved through this process. All right, so now let's get into the actual meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the budget summary. So I want to explain a little bit. So first thing we're going to talk about are our district revenues here. And what you see for 25-26, so you have the comparison here. And you have our revised budget from 25-26, where we started out last year, which is the budget that was adopted, to say we thought we would bring in about $247 million in revenue. As you can see, the projected actuals, those are projected actual revenues that we should see by the end of June, and that's at about $246 million. So it's slightly less than what was projected, but that is very typical in every year. Tax collections affect that. State funding changes affect that. Legislative changes, those kind of things affect that. You do see that the state funding, TRS on behalf of, that is kind of a pass-through account. That doesn't really change. That is just a benefit account for our employees. And so that one is not one where we really see any change in revenue. It doesn't affect our bottom line a whole lot on that because that is for the benefit of retirement plans for our employees. And of course, our SHARs and Medicaid, that over the course of the last several years has been reducing based on changes that have been made at the federal government in terms of funding the SHARs and Medicaid there. So you can see the projected at the end of the year at $246 million. We have done those same calculations going into 26-27, and you can see that we have a drop in the amount of revenue that we are anticipating seeing coming forward out of next year. That has to do with our tax collections. This is forecasting of our local funds and our local revenue based on student enrollment, based on those other parameters, our weighted ADA, our ADA that's coming in, our tax collections, and so on. So we are estimating a revenue of $237 million coming into this next year. Now, that is a $9.2 million decrease from last year to this year. However, as we looked at those budgetary items, we talked about our student enrollment, we talked about, looking at our processes here in the district. We've right-sized, we've consolidated schools to, address the fact that we know we are going to have a reduction in our revenues based on our student enrollments. Now, let's talk about expenditures. So, when we look at our expenditures here, you can see at the beginning of 25-26, when we adopted the budget, the first thing I'm going to talk about is our payroll expense. So you can see we adopted a budget last year of payroll expense of $231 million. What we are actually looking at in terms of expenditures over the course of this year is spending about $226 million, and that is through the end of June. So that would be our total payroll for the entire year of 24-25. Now, there's a couple of things that can be said here. We know that we have had positions over the course of this last year that we did not fill. We know we've had some people leave mid-year. Those are things that happen in every budget year. So what you're seeing there is you're seeing about a 97% difference between what we budgeted and what we actually spent. So there's about 3% there that is coming back to the district that can be added to this year based on the fact that our payroll expenses were not as high as we anticipated. It is very typical for a school district to spend somewhere between 97 and 98% of their budget. And so there's almost always that 2, 3, 4% that comes back to the district at the end of the year. So, and I want to point that out, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to show you kind of a 10-year historical of what that looks like for the district as we move forward. Our payroll going into this year, we are estimating the payroll expenses to be at $195 million. That is based on the right sizing of the district. It's based on those staffing numbers and those FTE numbers that we shared with the board. We have, through the and this is possible through the consolidations of the campuses, and that is where we see those 536 FTEs. Remember, it's a position, but not necessarily a person. So we have been able to consolidate those campuses. The individuals that wanted to stay with the district based on vacancies and other needs in the district, we've been able to fill those positions. And we are working with our HR department as we continue to work through the position management of this to be able to reach that $195 million mark. And we are 100% confident we are going to have no issues in reaching that particular mark for our payroll expense. You'll notice on the campus, and that is a $30 million decrease, which is what, when we originally started this process and started talking about our ability to adopt a balanced budget, we talked about being able to recover the deficit there. So you see a $30 million savings based on that. Now remember, this is a budgeted amount, and typically we don't spend our full budgeted amount in any particular area, and actually in any of the areas. So you'll see when we get to our campus-based allocations, last year we budgeted $2.7 million on our campus-based allocations. We are anticipating, and we've only spent $1.6 million of that. So as we move into next year, I do want to point out we are adjusting those campus-based allocations. Even though it's not as high as what we budgeted last year, we are still increasing that number compared to what they actually spent, to the tune of $343,000 we are adding back to the campuses. And one of the main reasons that we wanted to do that is we made the promise we are going to utilize the funds that we have. We're going to utilize our budget in order to put back into our students, to put back into our schools. And so, based on those campus-based allocations, and these are for resources and for additional spending that they have at the campuses. So this is based on the campus budget. So we're increasing the campus budgets to help accommodate for that. Department-based allocations, you can see we budgeted $43 million last year. We are projected to only spend $40 million of that. So you can see in every single one of the categories, we are not spending 100% of what we budgeted, and we'll show you what that looks like year after year. As we move into next year, we're looking at departmental allocations of $39.7 million. Now you may look, and you may say, well, $941 million is not that much to cut from department-based allocations. That's what most people refer to as central office allocations. What I want to say about that is many of the department-based allocations are departments at the central office area that actually directly support the programs that we have at the campuses. You're talking about your curriculum and instruction department. You're talking about special education. You're talking about testing, and you're talking about components that are directly given to the students. You're talking about instructional materials and so on. Even technology when we talk about Chromebooks and things like that. So those are your department-based allocations that are there. I also want to point out that in those department-based allocations for the course of the last 2 years, we have cut those budgets 10% across the board for the last 2 years. And as we work through this, there are some of these that will be, that, have said, hey, you know what, we don't need as much this year, so their budgets may come down a little bit more than 10. Some are not going to come down as much as 10. Some we know, we talked a little bit about we need to limit those expenditures. So when we look at, areas where we know we have overspent this year in that particular department, we need to make sure and we need to go examine what those things are and make sure that we allocate those budgetary funds appropriately to help cover those expenses so that we are not coming back asking for those budget amendments, that we are planning ahead for those things that we know we need to repair. So that brings our non-payroll expenses to $41 million in total, compared to the 42 that we are going to end this year with. You'll notice that our estimated expenditures equal our estimated revenues. Therefore, you are adopting and you are looking at a balanced budget there. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the harder part. So I'm going to break the fund balance piece down just a little bit so that it is clear to everyone how this breaks down. The dashes that you see in this part of the chart indicate zeros. So there's just no funds. There's no funds being expended there. There's nothing being taken out. So I just want to point that out just for clarification. So you'll notice our beginning fund balance when we adopted the budget for 25-26 was at $86.5 million. And we estimated the 29, that we knew that we needed $29.5 million of that to cover our expenses based on the budget that we adopted. And then, of course, we had the self-funded insurance there of the $11,300. You'll notice in our revised calculation, the $86.5 million, that beginning fund balance didn't change. What did change is the amount of dollars that we needed from the fund balance in order to cover our expenses, which was only $22 million of that. And we still do have that self-funded insurance of the 13.8, which I know we've talked about many times. Now, when we look at our balanced budget, we see the $237 million in revenues balanced out to a zero budget with estimated expenditures of $237 million. And you'll see that the totals at the end of this year, under 25-26, $50,469,228 is what we will have remaining in our fund balance. If we come to our balanced budget under 26-27, you will see that that fund balance number is the same. And I want to point out the reason for that. Remember, we have our revised budget, we have our budget, and then we have our actuals. So when we talked about that graph where our fund balance continues to go down, one of the things that we needed to do in order to stop the fund balance from continuing to decrease was to adopt a zero-based balanced budget. Once we do that, that stops the spending from the fund balance. So when we think about how we typically spend in our district of about 97, and how most districts spend 97 and 98% of their budget, that 3% gets to come back. And so you will see that fund balance number of the 50 million begin to increase incrementally as we go through this year, as we work through the process of staying within our budget parameters and staying within that balanced budget. So therefore, we are looking at that increase that we talked about you would see towards the end of the year. So that comes back. So it's a little bit of a building block here. We have to think about, Rome wasn't built in a day, and your fund balance isn't going to be built in a day either. We first have to adopt the balanced budget so that we're at a zero-based budget. And then as we begin to work through that budget year, there will be savings from that we know just based on historical trends that won't be spent, and those can come back into the fund balance for that. There's a couple of other numbers here. You'll see the estimated non-spendable fund balance here. You'll see that carries over from year to year, the $932,000. that are fixed assets. Those are fixed asset pieces, such as warehouse items that are just part of, it's not actual cash. It's more like warehouse items that we have in the district. And so that is reserved there as the estimated non-spendable. You then have our estimated unassigned fund balance of $49,536,000. So these two numbers added together give you your total fund balance of $50 million. So when the state looks at that threshold of how many months you should have, they look at the total amount of the fund balance. They don't break it down into those pieces. You will see that we have not had a restricted or a committed fund balance. These are zero because we don't have enough fund balance to be able to say we want to designate a portion of our fund balance for a specific thing. So hopefully as we begin to build that fund balance back in the future, the board can make some decisions about how we may want to use some of those dollars for specified pieces. I want to point out down here at the bottom in terms of our months of operating our operating expenses based on the unassigned fund balance. So the state says everyone should have at least 3 months of operating. So you'll notice when you adopted the budget last year, we had 1.87 months in reserve. Okay, so when we adopted the budget, we said, okay, we know it's going to drop to 45 million if everything goes the way that it says, so we know we're leaving 1.87. You will see that that has actually jumped up to 2.21 months just based on the fact that we only spent 97% of our budget this year. We only spent 97% of that, so that allowed some of those funds to come back in there. Based on just the flat adoption of our budget, we will start out the year with 2.5 months in our fund balance in order to be able to cover that. And so when we think about towards the end of the year, if we're able to reserve 3% of the total and we add that back, we will have in excess of 3 months in our fund balance to be able to cover those. And so we will be back on the road to the recovery there. The ability for us to gain just by adopting the balanced budget of 2.5, that is because of the right sizing. It is due to the consolidations of the campuses. It is due to us working with our departments and working with our staffing numbers and making sure that we are following within our guidelines and parameters here within the budget. I'm going to scroll down through here just a little bit, and we're going to talk about these numbers here. So just to kind of give some background into the previous chart. So what you're looking at here, and we just kind of wanted to give you a historical look, because I know it's kind of hard to say, okay, yes, Dr. Gosh, we hear you say we're only going to spend 97% of our budget. But you know, can we really do that? We've been spending in the deficit for year after year. So this is what I'd like to show you. So based on how even the last 3 years where we've been operating in a deficit with a declining fund balance, we have still only spent 97%. And so that's kind of the target that we're looking at. We have still only spent 97% of what we actually budgeted in any year, which allowed by the end of the year the 3% to come back. You will notice that in 2021, 2022, we only spent 84% of our actual budget. Now, that is largely due to the fact that we budgeted using our local funds as if everything was going to be paid out of local, and we paid a huge amount in that year and the year after out of ESSER. Okay, so as much as I would like to tell you we're going to be super conservative and we're only going to spend 84% of our budget, that is not going to happen. We do feel we do feel confident in the fact that spending the 97% is absolutely where we will be, and our goal obviously would be to be better. However, you can go up through the years. You can see even back to 2016, 2017. We were only spending 92% of what we actually budgeted. And our highest year was the year in 2019, 2020. And, you know, we had a little bit of an increase in our cost that year. Everybody needed a device. And we had to send everyone home, and we had to, you know, figure out how to do school differently. So we spent a little bit more in that year. But historically, the district has been very conservative in its spending throughout the school year. I know that our staff at the campuses and our staff at the district they're very committed to making sure that we are being responsible with the funds that we are given in our departmental budgets, and also in human resources. As we have worked through this process, there are so many things that we are putting into place to make sure as we go through this hiring process, we are setting in place certain processes, checklists, goals, and parameters. And we have some additional pieces for position control that we are putting into place with Skyward that is going to tell us, hey, guess what? You're starting to You're asking to hire an additional FTE that you do not have budgeted for. So the system would actually be able to tell us next year, okay, if you hire one more person, it's going to go over what you said you were going to allocate. So at that point, then that tells us, okay, we need to sit down, we need to talk about this, we need to look at it, we need to make sure, is this something that we need to do? And do we have, 1%, 2% left in the budget to be able to cover that? Can we bring in that allocation because, we have it available? So those are some of the things that are going to really help us move through this part of the process. All right, this is the chart I want to talk about because this is a little bit of a confusing chart. So we want to spend a little bit of time diving into what this actually shows us. This has nothing to do with the tax rate, okay? In terms of, we are not looking at your tax rate. So the gray bar and the blue bars, that's not your tax rate at all. We're going to talk about tax rate after this, but this does have a lot to do with the way schools are funded and the way we need to look at our copper pennies and our golden pennies. So the blue bars, let's talk about the blue bars. The blue bars are the taxable housing value that we have in the district. That's the amount of taxable value. So if we went to the tax office in 2016, the taxable values of all of our properties were just a little over $8 million. This last year, they're just over $14 million. And we have those numbers down here in the chart as well. So you can see, each year, this is what the total taxable value was within the district. Now, the gray bar is the taxable growth. So you kind of have to think of the state as, it's kind of a balancing act. As property values go up, your tax growth goes down. And that's kind of done by design. The state looks at starting to compress your values because they want to try to keep the amount of taxes people are paying the same. So you've heard people talk about tax compression, where your tax rate comes down. You've probably heard that word. And when we look at our tax rate in a minute, you'll be able to see what that compression looks like. But on the reverse side of that, as your property values go down, the tax rates go up. But the amount of taxes that folks are paying stays relatively the same. So if their value went up, the taxable growth went down, which meant we compressed the rates down. If the property rates go down, then the tax rates decompress, for lack of a better word, those go up. So that's kind of what you see in 2016. So then in 2016, there was a lot of growth in our tax rate. And you can see that go along. And then in 2020, it dropped in our taxable values. Now, 2022 is a little bit of an anomaly there because we had both. But 2022 is right after COVID. All the property values were way, way high. You may remember if you wanted to sell a house because you were going to get so much more for your house during that time than you were any other time. And those property values went up. But then you can see after that, the market said, okay, we're going to have to stabilize. This is a little bit of a market analysis here. These things are going to have to stabilize. And so you see that tax growth go down. That's where we start to see the compression of the tax rate begin to come down. Now in 2025, you see it dip way down. That is because in the state of Texas, we voted to adopt the $140,000 homestead tax exemption, which increased the amount of exemption that folks had. So their property values went up, but their taxable growth went down, so the tax rate compressed even further because of that. Now, it's come back up only because the state has said, okay, we're going to hold y'all a little bit harmless here. It was of no fault of your own that you're losing dollars and you're losing that growth in your tax rate. So we're going to give you some of that money back. So you see that jump up just a little bit there. You see it drop at the negative 3.71% for 2025 due to that homestead exemption, but then you see us jump up to a 0.96 growth because that is some of the growth that they're going to give us back. One way to think about this is the blue bar is all of the tax dollars that are available to us in the district. The gray bar is kind of the amount that we could potentially access based on our compressed growth rate of our tax rate. So when you hear people talk about golden pennies, let's talk about golden pennies a little bit. Judson ISD is one of the few districts in the state that has never used any of their golden pennies. And what's great about the golden pennies is that they are a one-for-one. If I go to the store and I have a golden penny, that golden penny is worth $1. And on the other side, I get to use the entire dollar. Nothing's taken out. The state doesn't keep any portion of that. The copper pennies are a little different. The copper pennies are, it's going to cost you $1, but the state's going to keep 50 cents, and then the district gets 50 cents. So when you have the golden pennies, and we have 3 of them, the golden pennies, we get the full $1. For the copper pennies, we essentially get half of that. And so that blue bar represents some of that taxable value that the district could gain back by approving to bring in some of those pennies. So now let's talk about our tax rate. So here is our tax rate history, and although on most of these I like the charts, but on this one I kind of like to look a little bit at the numbers here. So in terms of our homeowners and our voters, and for the most part, most people only pay attention to that total tax rate. That's what matters. That's what you're paying taxes on. I want you to notice that in 15-16, and remember the district has never used any of their pennies, but remember the values were lower, but our tax rate growth was high. The district was receiving $1.42. $1.42 is a tax rate. Now bump that down to this year of 0.9796 is what we're expecting to get this coming year and what we received this last year. The 0.9796 we would have received in 24-25, except that we borrowed some of those disaster pennies, which allowed our M&O rate to come up just a little bit to raise us back up to the $1.03 that we had been at in the 23-24 year. So what you see is those property values began to go up, and in 22, remember it spiked kind of where the growth of the tax and the housing values were right at the top. But then everybody started equalizing those out because all of a sudden everybody's tax bills were too high. So the appraisal value stayed, so we started compressing the tax rate to help equalize and to try to normalize the tax bills for the homeowners. And so you can see each year it started going down. And between 2022 and 2023, we went from being able to collect as a district $1.22 down to $1.03. And from $1.03 to 97 cents. So when we talk about revenue, you know, and when we talk about our local budget, now that 97 cents, we don't get to use all of that technically. Technically, we only get to use the portion under the M&O column there. So we only get to use about 66 cents of that, 66.69 cents of that towards our local budget. The INS side is just your debt payments, and the board does have some control over the rate on the INS. You can choose to increase that. But it doesn't help us on our local budgeting side, right? But it does help us on our debt service, but it doesn't really behoove the district to raise that INS rate right now because we are in a healthy position to be able to pay our debt back. And there's not really a need necessarily to do that. Now, this is important in terms of understanding our revenues. We noticed our revenues are dropping $9 million. Now, our enrollment has gone down. We've made changes to our expenses to be able to accommodate for that. But as we start to look at these tax rates and understanding how all of those pieces work towards the district budget, that's one of the reasons we want to kind of look at what does that look like when we come to potentially talking about a Vader election later. If we are looking at, because we're going to have that incremental increase in our fund balance, but even with that incremental increase in our fund balance, that still does not provide us the ability for raises. Where, as we go into the next budgeting and into our next budgeting meeting, we will have more information for you concerning the compensation plan and what that might look like if the district gave a 3%, 4%, 5% raise. What does it look like if you give a 3% raise with the 3 golden pennies? What does it look like at the 4% raise or the 5% raise? And kind of give some options to kind of look and see how that works. Now, some people could say, you know what, we have, I think, 9 pennies total, right? We have 9 pennies total. Let's just go for all of it because that's going to bring, that'll raise our tax rate to the, the top of where it needs to be. One thing that I would say with that, and sometimes I would caution, is that we don't necessarily know what the state is going to do. So I think we have to be very strategic in thinking about, number one, if we're going to look at a Vader to raise the tax rate, what's sustainable over time? We definitely want to put that back into our employees, but then we may not necessarily want to go after all of those pennies because there may be a time in Judson later on that those might really be needed for another purpose. Our goal here is to adopt a balanced budget and repair what was not exactly balanced where we had our fund balance go down and start to rebuild that. And from that standpoint, now turn around and begin to add back to our employees. So now we're going to jump into the last two components here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the other two parts of the budget. And I have Amanda Martinez, and she's going to speak just briefly on the child nutrition portion of our budget, which is a self-funded component from the state. I would point out that we are operating out of the fund balance here and operating in a deficit, because I know there's been a lot of concern that as we looked at reducing across the district that, things that are self-funded, maybe we don't need to reduce. In the same way that we are right-sizing the entire district, that goes into even areas that are self-funded. We don't necessarily want to maintain employees or components of something that we aren't necessarily using. So we want to make sure that that's right-sized. We are very healthy. I do want to say that Ms. Sanchez and the Child Nutrition Department have done a fabulous job. They've done a wonderful job with the child nutrition funds. We are very healthy. Most districts only have about 2 months operating reserves, and in some case less. So we are extremely healthy, but we want to keep our eye on it. If we are dipping into that fund balance, we definitely want to keep our eye on that. But in terms of what child nutrition looks like for the district, we are very healthy, and I'm going to have Amanda, is that good?
Covered it.
I covered it, okay. Now we'll talk about interest and sinking. Go ahead, Amanda, you can talk through that one.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gosh. Everything she explained was wonderful. Good evening, President and board members. We'll look at the interest and sinking. Just like the child nutrition, that is self-sufficient, self-sustaining, and what it is we have a great fund balance on this one. And don't want to confuse it with our general local fund balance. This is more of our INS fund balance. This is the fund that pays all our debt, like our mortgage payments. And if you see, our fund balance in INS is $45.1 million. We are ending the year with an estimated surplus of $776, and that's what we usually do year after year with historical trends that we do end with the surplus. Looking at our proposed budget, we do have a very small deficit amount of $84,000. Like I said earlier, historical trends show that we usually have a surplus, still healthy to operate and pay all our debt payments. So that is it. Is that going to be the end? Do you have anything else? So now that we ended our.
So now if, Dr. Gibson, do you have anything you would like to add?
Thank you. I was waiting for you to pause.
You were waiting for me to pause. You're supposed to just butt in, right?
I know. Well, and so a couple of things during the earlier presentations, the line graph that became something that we looked at a lot on the fund balance decline. So a lot of that, I mean, the Moat Casey staff felt comfortable with those line graphs, but there was also information still remaining in the year, right? So it's hard to say that dot's going to end, here when we're in March or we're in February. So now we've got a few more months under our belt, and we've got Lori under the hood.
Yes.
And so one of the things I heard tonight is a validation that where we had put that dot on stopping the downward flow and then its ability to come back up was validated. Is
Yes.
that fair to say?
Yes,
I heard
that's
those
correct.
numbers, and I just want to make sure, so where it was going down, we get stop, and then where it's coming up, those numbers were validated, and there's been a lot more analysis completed than when that graph was originally shown to you. We've had a whole another month of looking at numbers. Okay, is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And then another observation tonight is that the budget is balanced, and I appreciate that I saw a smile on a few of your faces, because I just don't want that to go by, that, there was a point where, people were saying it can't be done, and Dr. J, and there is a balanced budget. And just to remind everybody, a budget is a plan. That doesn't mean that every single number that's on that graph right there is 100% impeccably correct. but we've been through it enough now with enough
Yes.
analysis, with enough different people triangulating numbers that we're feeling our confidence level on what's on that chart is just getting
Correct.
higher and higher and higher. Is
Correct.
that fair to
And like
say?
Dr. Gosh mentioned in that next slide, is that we don't spend all our budgeted expenditures.
And I think it's important to also recognize, because you notice that that first column there says revised budget. So we adopt a budget here in the district on June 30th for a July 1 start. A lot of what we see, we don't have our actual financials to know exactly what the state's going to bring in, what the tax payments are going to be, all of that, really until September 1. So many districts do adopt their budget as of September 1. So ours are always based on projections. So, you know, we are projecting, our projected budget is here with the 237 million. That may get revised somewhat right after September 1 to show a little bit of a different revenue number there, simply because that is when we receive the audit reports from the state and we receive the final summary of finance from the state and so on, to be able to really know what those numbers look like. So that's why it says revised, because we always have an adopted budget, a revised budget, and an actual budget. So that's why you see those numbers move just a little bit. Dr. J?
Can you go to page 6, please?
Yes, sir. Six. The 6, yes.
Yeah.
Right
So
here.
if we look at that last paragraph, I think it's really important. We're going to look at page 6 and page 7. And so on page 6, we talk about the budget positions are on a more stable financial path with a balanced budget. Just like working with Mo Casey to look at our numbers under the hood, all of us looking at our numbers several times. So we are extremely confident that we are going to end the year and begin the year with a balanced budget. The incremental increase in the fund balance, like we talked about, is that every month as we spend only 97% of our budget, that extra 3% goes back into the fund balance. So every month, we're going to be putting money into our savings account, which will lead and build our fund balance back up to that $7 million additional cost that we have talked about all year long. So I just wanted to make sure that was important and pointed out. And then if we go just down to page 7, right there, you can see, as we talked about, there's our percentage over the years of spending that 97%. That's how confident we really are with the budget process.
This balanced budget, just to reemphasize, you stated it, but does not include a raise.
It does not include a raise, correct.
And so I just went, eyes wide open, it's balanced, but without a raise. Now, you don't have to go to it, but the conversation on the TRE, the tax, voter-approved tax ratification election, then that starts becoming meaningful in my estimation, because now it's not to balance the budget, it's for something tangible, and observable and touchable. And so that's just my commentary. No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Now we're ready for budgets.
Yeah.
I'm budget questions, so please.
Well, I was just
Sorry,
going to
Dr.
say,
Gibbs, I have one more
with a
thing.
budget, anyone can have anything they want, but everyone cannot have everything they want. So a budget is the prioritization of trying to find the balance, between all of various needs. This is just kind of a hunch and a gut feeling, no way to validate this. But a silver lining perhaps from the exercise, as tough as it's felt for you trustees and the tough work that you've had to do, I think that it's narrowed focus. I might look to the staff. We've had no choice but to narrow focus. Like really prioritize what's mission critical, what's nice to have, what's need to have. And so I would just say, as we sit here today, that this bunch, my observation is they know what's nice to have and what you need to have. And sometimes it's painful, but it's a good process to go through. That was my final.
All right, well, I'm going to start down this way. Mr. Macias, questions, comments?
Yes. Obviously, this is our first intense discussion on this, and probably not our last one as we get to June 30th to pass this budget for next year. Help me reconcile this thought. And the thought is that in the past, we've been in a position to spend 97% because we have sometimes unfilled positions, or positions that, we end up not staffing for the year. Based on my recollection, we've left 536 positions, or whatever the situation is, right, unfilled, which means we've already taken that into account. And I suspect they'll remain unfilled until we get to a place that we can start to bring in these positions again. Am I defining it right? Am I thinking through that process correctly? Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Yeah. So I think when we think about that component of the staffing, so we looked at right-sizing the staff, right? We looked at, let's look at the total number of students we have. Let's look at what the number of employees that we should have based on the recommended ratios, based on teachers. And you may recall, because I know that the campus staff is one of the main areas that you guys are really focused on, which we should be. We need to be focused on our teachers and our classrooms. And I know in working with Dr. Saunders and Dr. Toppin, as we worked through that right size of the staffing, we really looked at it in two different ways. We looked at it mathematically of total students divided by total number of teachers. We looked at it by a reduction of 7%. And then we really broke it down even further to kind of say, okay, here's, what we currently have in terms of students if we were to build a mock master schedule, and here's how many teachers. And actually, by doing the 7% reduction based on what we currently have to that, we actually ended up with more allocations using that calculation that we did, even with kind of doing, what would a mock master schedule look like. So in terms of the staffing positions as we look like, yes, there have been unfilled positions. And some of that is due to that. But within every school year, you still have that fluctuation. Even now, as we begin to look, we have positions that we are still moving individuals into as people are leaving the system. Some of those positions will replace, and some of those we may not need to replace as we begin to look at that. But as you go through in a year, there's a likelihood that we will have some positions that we may not be able to fill. Not because of the reduction in staff per se, but just based on individuals that may have left, or people may get a job at Christmas. You may see folks that leave mid-year due to families moving. And as you know, we are a highly mobile. There were a big military area, so a lot of times we do have families that they get transferred over the holidays, or they may change jobs at that particular time. And so it is through those pieces. But you can also see historically, even in our spending for our departments, we allocate for a certain amount, we budget for that amount, and then things happen. I can give you an example. Several years ago, we allocated within the local budget to buy a bunch of instructional materials. COVID came along and a couple of other things, and we didn't use those funds, so those funds stayed there. And we've had several instances of that since then, where we reserved the funds because we thought we would need a particular item. It was budgeted for, but then all of a sudden it shifted and we didn't need to purchase that item in that year, so those funds came back to the local budget. There are quite a few things within budgets that you see that occur that way. So those are some of the savings that we see there. But even in our staffing, whether you have 100 employees or whether you have 5,000 employees, you are going to have that fluctuation because it's very rare that you are 100% staffed for 100% of the entire year.
Yeah, that's a good staffing way to think of it. Generally speaking, the coldest winter in the last 100 years, build your budget on that, and then hopefully that doesn't occur again. Okay, so you just spent, $500,000 less in electricity than, what you built that. That's part of that 97. So you kind of build it on worst case scenario and pray for best case scenario, the non-staffing part of it. And Mr. Macias, I think it's just human nature. I think part of what we're saying, and Amanda, you probably have the most experience with this, for people to just not spend everything that's in their account. Like that's kind of what's at play here, right? Like, I know there's $1,000 in it. I don't want to get that close in case I missed.
No, that is correct.
A tax or something.
I mean, it's happening right now when you look at our revised budget versus our projected actuals.
Right.
It's less, 231 million, and we're projected to spend 226.7.
And I think Dr. J's point that that doesn't look like a lot, 97%, that just looks like 3%, but in a $237 million budget, that's pretty nice number that goes over towards the fund balance gain that we're seeking.
Yes, sir, and also to value your question, that really was a good question because this year is different. We cut positions and we're running on position management where we have just enough positions to fit the allocations that we have in our school district. But the other point of that is we have that balanced budget and we know we're going to be able to address the balanced budget. When we come over here, if it was just a standalone and we had no other data, I would be concerned, but I'm not concerned because we have 10 years worth of the data that we're looking at on how we have spent our spending, and over the last 10 years, we have at least that had 97% of our budget spent with a 3%. If you go through, we've had other years. And so the data tells us this is probably will continue, and so we feel real comfortable with the 3%.
And obviously digging a little deeper, and by the way, thank you for your response. If it's a standard 2.5%, 2%, 3%, do they vary? I mean, it sounds like a pretty solid trend. So are these always those highly difficult counseling positions that we can't fill, or I forget what you call them, there's positions that we outsource, we contract because we cannot find them, but we leave them in our budget. I'm trying to get a better sense of what that is so that we may consider some different future discussions. I don't need to know right now, but clearly it's interesting that if it's in that window, the variance is in that, is it the same thing every year? And then what kind of opportunity do we have to address that issue? So I'll probably circle back with you on that, Dr. Jacklish, but it just is an interesting question to ponder. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Ms. Jones, did you have any questions? Ms. Lee, any questions or comments? Go ahead. Microphone.
Dr. Gosh or Dr. J, I'm just curious in regards with the campus-based allocation. So I'm just assuming, because I know that you've talked to like principals or like each schools. So for the projected budget, because it looks like it's almost like 693 difference. Are the feeder schools, because I know that that difference is also because of the consolidation schools from my understanding, but the feeder schools were also kind of maybe anticipating with their budget that it could be also a little high from their previous one, isn't it? Or am I understanding it right or no? So I'm just assuming that maybe the principals you guys have really like detailed gone through for each campus, like talk to the principals, okay, we are really looking at like this amount,
Correct.
X, Y,
Yeah.
Z, or-
So we base the allocations in the campus, number one, based on the number of students that they have. We bring those principals in and we talk through their allocations, then we talk through their budgets. I know they came in this last week and met with Ms. Martinez and the finance staff to be able to go through, here's the allocations for your campus, here's what, where would you like these placed? And so they're placing it into the budget codes and those functions that they want to utilize those funds. And that is based on, the campus, the number of students that they are expecting to receive.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that this is the local funds. We still have government, federal funds.
Oh, okay.
ESSA. So Jody Burton, our federals program director, has already spoken to those campuses, gave them maybe additional state allotted funds through the state comp, which is still general fund and in this balance, and also giving them title funds, which is not part of this balance, yes.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Also, ma'am, I'd like Ms. Garza to just give us an overview of the last couple of days. what we've been doing.
Yes, so the last couple of days, we've been meeting with every campus principal and going over their allocation. As Dr. Gosh shared with all of you, we looked at all of our projected enrollment, and that's what we are staffing our campuses on. At some campuses, our enrollment has decreased based on our projections, and so in some instances, we are losing some staff, but we have enough positions across the district to where nobody is going to be without a job. So whenever we're meeting with campus principals, they might be losing some allocations, but then they're able to shift them into other positions that they have. And so we also have been meeting with principals from campuses together, because I know that there was some principal changes, and that way we can look at where the best places are to move people. And I think we've got the last round of meetings tomorrow, and then we'll be completed with that.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things to kind of finalize on your question, because I know you were specifically asking about just the campus funds for other things as well. So one of the reasons we bring them in is to kind of look at that allocation for them, help, and then they go through the process so that when we come back in at our next budget workshop, you'll be able to see how those break down by those function codes. So you'll be able to see where those dollars are being expended based on the campus and the departmental budgets. So that's part of that process as well. And that sheet will also include some of the title funds and the other funding sources. This is strictly just $2 million based on the local budget.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And also, just to maybe clarify, we are not having less resources at our campuses this year. Okay, we're not cutting their opportunities to support their campuses. As a matter of fact, they're getting more funding this year on the campus level.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Dr. J. And then one more thing I think that I have here. Dr. Gosh, because you mentioned about the department this time, it's almost $1 million. Is that the total of each department, or is it like a million?
That's a total, yeah, so that 39 million that you're seeing there is those are all of the operational funds that we have to run every department across the district. And so that 941 million is the amount, or 941,000 is the amount that we are decreasing the total budgets from the department. So that 941,000 is taken out of kind of all the departments, so to speak. And, you know, some may lose more, some may gain, in order for us to be able to balance and make sure that we are allocating those funds in the right places to be able to cover our expenses, so that we limit those budget amendments that you have seen come through in the past.
Oh, okay, because the concern that I heard before is that, as you mentioned before, like 10%, I believe 10%, about like each department's kind of like last 2 years that they were like, I don't know, is it a right term, like forcibly cut something on their department? So
Part of the
that right,
budgeting
or-
process is that we send the information to every department, and we ask them to allocate the funds that they think they need for budgeted items coming up in the next year. Same thing for the principals. And then we look at those numbers, and so we took those budgets, and in some cases, people are getting the exact amount that they asked for. Their budgets have already been cut, and the dollar amounts that they asked for, that they know they need to function for next year, is more than 10% less than what they had the previous year, but it's what that director or what that individual over that department requested. So in some cases, we're able to give them exactly what they requested. In some cases, there are things that have been requested that maybe we need to look at, maybe we need to examine the expenditures from that particular area and identify, are we able to reduce that so that we make sure that we fall within our budget parameters here. So the last couple of years, we have cut all of those budgets 10% across the board. That is not what's happening right now. Right now, we are looking at that budget as a whole and saying we need to reduce by 941,000. How are we going to do that and make sure that the expenses that people need covered? Because one of the things that Ms. Martinez did is she asked each department to identify, what are your fixed costs? Like, what are the things that we know we have to pay? I'll give you an example. We know we have to pay the bill for laptops. We know we have to pay the insurance bill. We know we have to pay for utilities, so those kind of things. So we looked at what those fixed expenses were, dropped those in first. so that we can make sure within each department, those fixed expenses that we can't do anything about, we have to pay that bill, that those are covered first. And then we start dipping into, you may recall I talked about what are those ideas of the things we would like to do. This may be one of those years where we do balance we really need to do this right now because we have an academic need at one of our campuses. We have a D or an F rated campus that we know we need to plug some dollars in. So this is something that we need to budget for here at the district level to make sure that we are able to support that particular need. We want to provide these other things within the district, but we're going to put that on our list, and we're going to look at that as we begin to go through this year, and we see that fund balance go back up. Now we're going to put that on that list of, hey, this is a want, this is something that we think in the future is going to benefit Judson, and we're going to look and see when we do this process next year, can we put that in that budget and go through the process that way.
I think it's important to remember what is in that budget category too, which is a lot of things you can't change. Like
Correct.
tons of it is Mr. Brooks's money because it is the electric bill, the water bill, the trash bill, the gas for the buses, the spark plugs, the property insurance, the car insurance, all of those things like that is
Those are fixed expenses.
much harder to do, plus all of our contracts, so special education, all the speech language contracts we keep approving and all of those expenditures, that all goes into that bucket. So a lot of those are campus money, but it's just paid by the department. So I think maybe when we see the department budget, some of those numbers will make a little more sense and why sometimes those are hard to cut because none of that is people. All those department people are up above in that $30 million cut. This is
Correct.
all the non-people stuff, which is pretty much all the bills
And there's-
district pays on behalf of everybody else, I think, if that's helpful.
And there are some of those things in there that we can look at and address and go, are there ways that we can reduce fuel costs? Are there ways that we can work with transportation to look at the routes, and can we reduce that somewhat? Are there things we can do to help lower our insurance rates? You know, so there, even though we know they're fixed expenses, there are still things that we can do to be more efficient. But then there's other things that we know, this is what it costs us every single year, and that price doesn't change. You know, we know some of those costs as well, and so we have to make sure those are covered first.
Dr. Gosh said this twice tonight, and I want to put an exclamation point on it. So this may not be the year for a lot of good ideas. Like, okay, we got to stick to the plan. You're saying we're not going to ignore them. Let's keep the list, but let's don't just say, let's put it on next month's agenda and then potentially consider it as an action item while you're trying to calibrate and make sure that dollars are getting shoved to the academic. That's, so
Correct.
you're not saying no.
Not saying
You're
no,
just
I'm
a
saying, let's
different-
create the wish list.
A different
We're building
process.
the dream team right now, and we're building the district to bring that back up. And, you know, there are things that we know we want to invest in. I know we've talked a lot about, let's promote our district. And we can do that without increasing our costs. We have a lot of resources there. So let's think about things that we can do to support our district that fit within our budget, but that we can also do and say, hey, this is what we're planning to do. This is where we're going, and spend the time to create those lists and talk about those and say, we are on the right trajectory here at Judson ISD.
Oh, okay.
Yep, keep going. You got more? No, go for it.
Well, I don't think I have any more, but I just want to comment one thing that I guess it's really nice that you guys this year has addressed like each department, like their concerns, like no department would feel that kind of like targeted, because like every year they would always find like a ways like to cut, because they're kind of like forced to cut for like that 10%. But now it just seems like you guys really analyze like each department and just total like this 1 million instead of 1 million in each department, as from my understanding on other concerns of department that previously were cutting. So it's really nice that you guys, you know, have that total and analyze like each department, like, okay, this time, like this department, we don't see it like to cut like 1 million on this because they might be needing it too, or something like that. So
Now, I do think every department in the district recognized the fact that we're in a deficit budget. So I do want to say that, I don't want to say that everybody came in with, here's pie in the sky, I know I'm going to ask for everything. I do think that people looked at it from the standpoint of, if I can cut, I'm going to cut, and submitted those things in that way. So I don't want to give the projection that we didn't tell anybody to cut anything. I think in many cases, people really took a hard examination of their budget and said, hey, we want to be part of the process and want to help here. And they submitted what they felt like they could do for this next year, and trying to identify just programs and things that we can, shift dollars maybe for a year or so.
Ms. Lee, what I really want to emphasize is that everybody really was really good. I got here in February, and February is like the end. You start making sure that you're getting everything you need to finish out the year, and then you take a look at your budget for the last third of the school year. And so everybody was really good about understanding the fact that if we don't need to spend it, we're not going to spend it. And so as we pulled back, and I think that was March,
Yes.
we pulled back in March saying, okay, make your big expenditures, because after March, for the next couple months, we want to pull that money back. So we're going to start building what we call like a zero balance budget, where everybody starts from zero, and you take a look at your departments, and we take a look at our schools, and what does it take to run each one? So we go back and revisit that, so we don't spend and buy things like we've always done. Like at the end of the year, back in the day, many years ago when I was a principal, they used to tell you, if you don't spend it, you lose it. And that was a bad way to address things, because you would find rooms full of paper.
Yes.
Just reams and reams of paper, because that's where I had to spend it. And for 10 years, you'd have enough paper. And so our people have done a really, really good job of understanding that. And so that's why we're building that zero budget from the bottom, making sure everybody gets supported. Absolutely, in some cases, we have to say, do we really need that, or can we pass on that this year and use that money in another place? And everybody's done a great job.
Okay, thank you, Dr. J. Thank you, everyone, for all the hard work. Thank
The
you.
word intentional, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Intentional. All right, Ms. Canoyer. Any questions or comments, ma'am?
My questions were answered during the presentation.
Okay, Ms. Stanford.
Just back to that 97%, is there any way that some of that is from over budgeting, or is that like a set figure that just never gets spent?
It's really common for that to occur in budgets, and I do think it's just human psychological that I'm not going to spend all the way up to the last number, because there might be some overrun or something I wasn't projecting, and so I think it's just human nature.
That's what I was thinking of the example. Like if you tell the nurse at Converse she has $1,000 to spend on Band-Aids, she's not going to spend $1,000.
No.
She's going to spend $970.
Correct.
There's your 3% right there, because
Yep.
she's worried that with tax and shipping, she
Something
can't
I
go
didn't
over
think
1,000 or
of.
she's going to get in trouble
Yeah.
with principal, right?
Yes.
So I have no idea who the nurse at Converse is, so I'm not picking on you. But that's where that kind of comes in, is everybody just spends just a little bit extra, and there's a couple of positions here or there. That was kind of where my brain was going with it.
Right. Well, and Ms. Stanford, I want to point out that the 97%, those are in years where we were budgeting in the deficit, okay, where we spent the 97% of that. If you look historically back, when we were adopting surplus or balanced budgets, we really were spending less than 97% of our budget. And in talking to Lori and Moat Casey, they said it is a pretty standard number in the finance world to say, on average, the majority of districts spend between 97 and 98% of their total budget every year, and historically speaking. So when we started talking about that, I said, I'm curious, I want to see what ours looks like over the course of the several years. And of course, you can see the ESSER years, and that's for obvious reasons. But in 2016-17, those were standard years. Now, in those years, you saw the tax rate was much higher at that point. So, as we look at that, and we start talking about those dollars, even if we sold the 3 pennies or whatever through the Vader, we still wouldn't be at $1.42, in terms of our tax rate. But that would increase some of that, and that may not, and that's not necessarily to go necessarily to fund balance per se, but you would have some additional dollars out of that to provide for raises. And then you could also have some of those additional dollars for programs or to supplement some of those needs that would require you not to spend some of the other budgeted funds. So those are just some of the things to think about as we look future forward, once we've adopted the budget in terms of that. But based on the 97%, that's been the trend the last 3 years in this district. But historically in the district, we have always been much more conservative with the funds that we have.
Ms. Stanford, if I could just add, when we were talking about our conversations and we were talking about our commitment, and one of our guiding principles was lead with the heart. And so as we're balancing the budget, and we made it very clear to the board that this is a balanced budget, but there's no room in there for raises because we can't incur a reoccurring cost. And so that's why the Vader continues to come up, because with those 3 golden pennies and maybe a couple copper pennies, and we talk about in the future, that's a way where we can use that guiding principle to lead with a heart, to show our employees how much we value them and give the opportunity to create a compensation plan through the Vader.
We can only do that once, right?
No.
It's year
From
after
the
year.
Vader? I mean, we can give a raise 1 year and we pay it that, but we can't give another raise the next year and the next year
Well,
on the Vader funds.
when it depends how much money we take in from the Vader. Like, for example, a golden penny would generate about 3 golden pennies would generate about 11.3 million, okay? To create a raise for everyone across the board, 1% is, for everyone in the district, would be 1.8 million. So if you did a 3% raise, rounded it out, that would be a little under $6 million. And so if you created a Vader and got 11.3 million every year, you could do a 3% raise, that would be like a little bit under, we'll just round it up to 6. So you
half
get
of
that, you'd get that reoccurring 6 million every year, but you get that 11 million coming in every year. So that would leave you 5 million left over every year coming in for innovation or some other things. But that, out of that 11.1 million, you'd have to take 6 out every single year for that 3% raise.
Right, but you couldn't do that again and again. You can take the 6 million out and you have 6 million
Well,
left.
it's a
Yeah.
recurring cost, but it's a recurring replenishment.
Yeah, the Vader comes
Right.
every year too.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
I think what Ms. Stanford is saying is that if we use that, then how do you increase and provide a raise the next year?
Again.
And the way that you do that, when we start talking about how are we raising our fund balance? We're raising our fund balance because we aren't spending 100% of what our budgeted funds are. So the Vader provides you that immediate ability to provide a raise right now
Then,
with
yeah.
those funds. But if you think about that, if through the Vader, then we were able to only spend 95% of our estimated budget, now you're taking 5% and putting that back in. So the 3% that we hope to regain this year would go into fund balance. And the next year, we would budget based on what our revenues are and adopt a balanced budget on those revenues and make sure that our staffing was right and follow the same parameters we are here, so that each year you begin to add back to that fund balance so that you are increasing that amount so that you can come up and go, you know what, we have the additional funds here to be able to maintain an additional 1% or an additional 2% raise, I think is what you're asking. How do
Well,
we
it's a
do that
finite-
going forward? Because yes, the Vader's one time
I worry that
reoccurring.
for anyone listening, we've left a door open.
Yes.
So the Vader, once achieved, that additional tax rate, whatever it may be, is ongoing.
I know.
Okay, all right, I just want
But
to make
12
sure for
million
anyone
ongoing.
listening, you
It's
get,
12 million every year.
Right.
well, you don't know for
Roughly, give
sure
or take,
because you
give or
don't know
take.
what
Yeah,
your taxable
that'll be
value
based on your
is gonna
taxable
be in
value.
the future.
I'm just
but-
rounding.
Yeah.
Let's just say
If
12
you
million.
think forward based on this year, then that's what Dr. J was doing a while ago. He was projecting forward based on this year.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like maybe we were leaving the door open. The value of no one would pass a TRE if you only got that money 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
It would not be worth all the effort and
No,
expense.
I knew that.
Yeah.
We get 12 million every year.
Yes.
But as far as raises go, if we do spend half of it in the first year for raises, now we're getting 6 million extra every year. Because we've now,
Correct. You're basically
we've now
going to spend
pledged
a half of it every
so
year.
we have a finite amount of money to give in raises. I don't think our plan is to spend all that 12 million in raises.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
And you're absolutely correct.
So we have other ways we're going to have to be
Exactly.
able to
And
give
then
raises.
in the future, what we'll have to do is, when we have those discussions later, we'll have to determine how many pennies would we want to go. We're just talking about the 3 golden pennies. We still have the 9 copper pennies too. So we could do a finance compensation plan as we move forward to say, if the district is considering going out for a Vader for this, and also for innovation and to build up the fund balance, how many pennies copper would we need to add to those 3 golden pennies to meet our needs, where we could do a raise with a reoccurring cost, but still have enough money to continue with some of the programs we want to, and then have money later on in the future to come up with another raise that would be sustained by that Vader.
And we also have to consider the fact that, the revenue that comes in based on those, that tax rate that's presented, that depends on the number of students that we have come in the district. So as our students increase, that's going to increase the revenues. So we may not, in that next year, if our revenues increase just naturally, we may not have to use all of that original 6 million, so more of it goes back to the fund balance. If our student population decreases, that's going to result in an equal reduction in the number of staff that we have. So then therefore, we're not spending as much. And, so there's other factors that will relate to that to help us rebuild the fund balance and be able to adopt a budget so that in future years, we would be able to approve a raise, whether that's a 1%, 2%, but that is just you can't look at it as this is the budget doesn't
sure.
freeze as what it is this year, nor does the Vader freeze in what it would be this year based on those components. So you have to take all of those other factors and know that as you build those funds are going to continue to increase, giving you the ability to do that. That's how we
Well,
built it up over time.
A growing fund balance wouldn't allow us to give raises, because we're not going to do raises off that, the fund balance. But you said a key thing about increasing enrollment. That's key. So
Correct.
if we
Because that brings in
market-
additional revenue. Right.
If we market ourselves and we start pulling in and attracting students back to the district, that's another way of increasing our revenue, correct? Which would be a good strategy on our part, to look at that real hard.
Absolutely. Increased student attendance, increased enrollment is the key.
So I'm going to keep coming back to that,
Yes.
because I want to see us working on that side of the ledger, too. And I also just want to thank all the principals and the department heads. It sounds like they worked with you hand in glove really hard,
Yes, ma'am.
and our cabinet members, to put all this together and to accomplish this. So I want to thank all those leaders in the district that have worked really hard together with you. Thank you.
Mrs. Potteet.
I want to say all of my questions were answered, just kind of with everybody asking their questions. But I also did want to kind of tag along with her statement. I appreciate that you guys were reaching out to the department heads and everything, and you were working really closely with them. It's obviously just the way to move forward. So thank you guys for that. You guys did an amazing job. All your department heads, your principals, everything else. Want to say thank you guys, because I know that it was a lot of work. You had to buckle down and get it done in an extremely short amount of time. So there are no amount of thank yous or congratulations that we can give you on this dais that can really pay you back for what you guys did in what felt like a minute.
And
So-
we still have meetings to go with some of
Yes.
the
I'm sure.
departments. So
I'm
we
sure.
haven't finished meeting with all of them, so.
I know, but just
This is
pulling
still
all of
in
this
progress.
together.
But yes, ma'am, thank you.
Pulling all of this together
Yes.
in that short amount of time, it deserves to be recognized. So thank you guys, everybody that was working on this with us.
I want to say I really like the format and how we laid this out, because this is back to how many conversations we had, Dr. Gibson, about that board strategic role and strategic role in finances, because the verb used for finances in the Texas Education Code for a board is not oversight, it's monitor. And that is a much more active verb than the word oversight, right? And how a board monitors the finances of a district is something we haven't quite figured out yet. But this is the start of it, right? This is how we now, and we work with the board and with you, and figure out what this looks like, because that performance management calendar and the way that we monitor things in each of these functions is something that, has to be this board's goal for 26, 27. How do we support you guys and still have that level of oversight and monitoring that we need? And not being afraid to hit this stuff head on, right? There was a lot of fear, don't want to talk about it 2 days before the end of the fiscal year. You're that parent who opens the report card and be like, oh my God, there's my kid's grades. Oh, or we need another $10 million, right? Like, that is not the way to address financial challenges. It is every 6-week ADA comes
Slow and
out,
steady.
we're relooking at the revenue and the expenses. When snapshot hits, we're relooking at weighted ADA based on how we categorized everyone within that, and really facing those choices. Property insurance goes up $500,000. Are we cutting something? Are we going into fund balance? That those are very intentional decisions brought to the board on those kinds of choices. And I'm excited this is a good start to get us in the right mindset of how we're going to partner with you guys for this next fiscal year and just do things differently, right? Just do it differently, and us staying in our lane. And us staying out of your lane, but there just being that open communication. I'm excited for that. A couple of questions I had on the increase in the property values. I've been reading up on the Bexar County stuff, and obviously I'm going to be doing a lot of thinking about Vader stuff and, campaign analysis type things. Because it looks like while our property values went up, it was not because the individual property values went up. Ms. Lee's house didn't go up. Ms. Jones's house, Mr. Macias's house didn't go up in value. According to a lot of the reports from Bexar County, it's either the commercial values went up or growth, more houses, more apartment buildings and that. I haven't seen or be able to find online. Bexar County issues our tax report that shows all of our exemptions, all of our average values. Does that come out this summer? I haven't seen it yet. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's like a 6-7 page document. Whenever we come across that, if we're going to be out campaigning for a Vader, the impact on individual homeowners in our district is something we're going to have to be very knowledgeable of, and to know that while property taxes have gone up, that may not be an impact on the individual homestead people within our district. If somebody's value went down 5%, then if there's Vader in there. So whenever we see that come out from Bexar County, I'd love to take a look at that so we can think about our individual families.
Yes,
residing in the district.
we use those reports to help us with the summary of finance, to
Okay.
calculate the tax collection. So we have
Okay.
one.
I found the 25 one online. I just couldn't find the 26 one online in Bexar County. So I just don't know when
It just came out in April.
Okay,
So
awesome.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm the math nerd, so I would like to just take a look at that for my own thinking through how we do Vaders and what the impact is on our community. I just have one question on child nutrition. Are we still in mandatory spend down? We had been for like the last 2 years because our fund balance was too high, and it's the one fund balance that can't be too high, that they make us spend it down. Are we out of mandatory spend down now?
Yes, we're out of it.
Okay, we're back into our safe
They
area.
raised that to 6 months operating. So
Okay.
we fall around 2.5 to 3 annually,
now.
our district. Mhm.
Okay, perfect. I know we got a lot of great new kitchen equipment, and that spend down was great for a lot of our kitchens on our campuses and being able to upgrade a lot of our equipment. So, but I just want to make sure we weren't still in that. So, okay, that's all the questions that I had written down.
Thank you.
So, anything else?
Madam President, Ms. Boswell, that y'all really haven't got to meet,
Oh, yes.
but you've met Amber, and then Amber took the CFO job at Coppell, and Lori Boswell, we hired from Weatherford ISD. She was business manager for 25 years in Weatherford, stellar reputation, and she was in the business world prior to working for the school district. So she's super, sees the macro, sees the micro, she and Amanda can start talking, and I just kind of feel like I need to go clean my sock drawer or something, just let them at it for a while. But she's in El Paso tonight, actually where I left her to come here. We're working on their budget. And so I've just today, texted and said, is there anything you need to say to Amanda? And I'll set up a Zoom or whatever. And she texted back, Amanda's got it. So and Lori is not a touchy-feely, right? See, Amanda, it's straightforward, okay? Yeah, but a lot of experience. But anyway, she was bragging today about Amanda and just like, nope, we're good. Numbers she has, they're solid. And I don't mean there's not stuff still to do. I know y'all have got things to do. But trustees, I want you to just think about they're closing out 25, 26. Like, this is the number. We need to know where we're going to end the year. And then they're validating the revenue projections and the expenditure projections for 26, 27, basically, right? And I know that's the simplest way to say it, and that's 9,000 calculations, right, Amanda? I mean, but anyway, they're in the middle of it, and they're doing a great job.
No, I think that, I think it's a good point to bring up to the public, too, is that I know there's been, like, a lot of rhetoric around us not having a CFO right now, right? And so people are all worried because we don't have a CFO.
It's understandable.
But what we've done
Yep.
is assemble a team.
That's correct.
A financial team, right?
Correct.
And when we're doing something completely different than we've ever done before in Judson, right? Then maybe a whole bunch of new perspectives, and especially with her having outside perspectives from other school districts and knowing how other things are done, along with new leadership, old leadership that's been doing this. So you've seen the way we've done it, and I think what's coming out now is just, create a finance dream team. You don't need a CFO. I mean, we'll eventually get a CFO, but we all know in hiring, you got to pick the right person at the right time, right?
Yeah.
And what's going on now is going to make a CFO position at Judson ISD a much more palatable position that people are going to want to come to, because we're going to have righted the ship, right, type thing, and we're going to have all these systems in place, and the board's going to have some finance systems in place, and we're all going to have systems in place, and then we become a place where CFOs want to come, and they're all banging on the door, and they all want to come be part of the dream team. So I hope the public's not too worried too much by not having someone in that one line on some spreadsheet or some box, but there is a finance team that has just been, killing themselves 16 hours a day trying to get this done, and we're so appreciative of that. And, as soon as, give us a couple more months, and then if you're looking for a CFO job, anybody out there, we are going to be ready to accept, and we'll have a great balanced budget for you to implement for us. So, but I know we're already conversations going on across the state, and people are watching us, so I know we'll get the right person at the right time. So, all right, well, thank you, team. The board will now adjourn into closed session pursuant to the following sections of the Texas Open Meeting Act. 5E, I am not going to announce because we do not have anything on that. So pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, discussing personnel, the personnel report, and updates, including new hires, resignations, and administrative appointments, including one elementary principal. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, discussing contract renewal lists for campus and district office administrators, non-certified professionals for the 26-27 school year. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, discussing contract renewal lists for campus and district office administrators for the 26-27 school year. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071, attorney consultation regarding legal issues related to proposed non-renewal of term contract employee and termination of probationary contract employee at the end of the contract term. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, consider and discuss recommendation to terminate probationary contract employee at the end of the contract term. And pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071, consultation with attorney regarding legal issues pertaining to cause number 2026 CI 09866, Jose Macias versus Judson ISD et al. In the Bexar County District Court in the 73rd Judicial District. The time is now 7:03, and we are in closed session. The board will now reconvene in open session. The time is 8:11 PM. No final action, decision, or vote was taken while the board was in closed session. All right, we will move on to agenda item 6A. I will make a motion. I move to approve the personnel report and updates, including new hires, resignations, and administrative appointments to include one elementary principal. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion by Ms. Ryan, second by Mr. Macias. And we will proceed to vote. All right, motion passes 7-0. Before we move on from that one, can I give you the microphone, Dr. J?
Yes, ma'am. We are proud to announce that our new principal at Converse Elementary will be Heather Schumacher, and Ms. Schumacher has been our interim principal this past year and has done an amazing job, and we are looking forward to her continuing this wonderful success.
Thank you, sir. All right, we'll move on to 6B. I move that we approve the contract renewal list for campus and district office administrators, non-certified professionals for the 26-27 school year. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Ryan, second by Ms. Potteet. And we will proceed to vote on that one. Okay, motion passes 7-0. All right, move on to 6C. I move that we approve the contract renewal list for campus and district office administrators for the 26-27 school year.
Second.
All right, motion by Ms. Ryan, second by Ms. Jones. And we'll proceed to vote. All right, motion passes 7-0. Okay, no action on 6D and no action on 6E. 6F, Mrs. Potteet, you have a motion.
I move to terminate the probationary contract of Angela Flanagan at the end of the contract term to serve the best interest of the district, and further move to authorize the interim superintendent to provide written notice to Ms. Flanagan of this board action as required by law.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Potteet, second by Mrs. Jones. And we'll proceed to vote. All right, motion passes 7-0. Then we'll move on to 6G. I move to authorize legal counsel to proceed as discussed in closed session in regards to cause number 2026 CI 09866, Jose Macias versus Judson ISD et al. In the Bexar County District Court in the 73rd Judicial District.
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Ryan, second by Ms. Jones.
And I have a comment real quick, and that's just for the record. At the request of legal counsel, Mr. Resendez, I sat out of discussion in closed session.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Stanford, and we will proceed to vote. Okay, motion passes 4-1 with 2 abstentions. There we go. Sorry, I had to do math on that one. All right, there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned at 8:15 PM. Thank you.